Beginning a new journey can be stressful. That's why it's important to prepare the best you can. You never know what types of obstacles you may face as you venture out along these new paths. No matter what the journey, it's important to be proactive. Because if you can't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of your loved one. Order your copy today at www.jessicalazellcannon.com.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining in today. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. If you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. Today, I wanted to talk about one particular caregiver story. This story is yet similar to others, but it's about that shocking reality. The shocking reality of our loved ones declining, possibly experiencing hallucinations, or the stress that builds towards the end as we care for our loved ones. And quite frankly, when we reach that point that it's hard to look, it's hard to watch, but you still feel compelled to be there. And that's kind of where I am. As mom continues to progress, she's getting through further stages of dementia, but at this point where she's at, new medications for the agitation and the lack of sleep have been introduced. We've tried various alternatives through food, exercise, trying to change up routines, and even sometimes trying to find, even at this point in this late stage of her journey, new special interests. But safety remains an issue. So coming from that proactive and preventative mindset, I did not want to have medication be the only way. But when it comes to the deterioration of the brain, unfortunately, and keeping our loved ones safe, I had to accept that this is just going to be another part of our journey, and we're at this part of the journey. So I've reached yet another level of acceptance. As this reality check turns into our new normal, I'm having to connect with even more caregivers on a level where we're learning and teaching each other. So even though many of us expect this to be one of those ends to our means, it's still heartbreaking nonetheless. My next guest today, his name is Brian Moritz. Brian is here with me to share, actually here with me in our studio, to share how he had to care for his mother out of state and how this kind of care quickly became a very shocking reality check for him and his family. Brian was born in a small town just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but he grew up in the Northeast Ohio area. In 2013, Brian accepted a job that moved him here to Austin, Texas. But wouldn't you know, shortly after Brian moved here to begin a new life with family and career, his mother started to show signs of dementia. Brian is a father of two fantastic high schoolers and has an amazing and understanding wife. When he's not caring for his mother, or when he was not having to be able to be there with her, he also enjoys mountain biking and racing cars in his free time. Although he's been able to return to that return to the hobbies comes with a little bit of a heavy heart, as Brian's mother succumbed to dementia at the end of August 2021. She gained her angel wings at the early age of 68. So today I wanted to allow Brian to share his story because we're learning from each other. Thanks for coming on with me today.
Oh, pleasure to be here. If it like I mentioned earlier before we started this, if it helps one person, then it's worth it, right?
Absolutely.
So
before you actually moved to Austin, what kind of relationship did you have with your parents out there?
So we lived a short drive from them. We both lived out in the country. They live on a little, I always called it a little piece of heaven. They have like 5 or 6 acres in a farming town in Ohio, and it's just gorgeous. And we built a house not too far from them. And, Mom was always the babysitter, was always the go-to, when we wanted to have date nights out.
Right.
She always took the grandkids and stuff like that. And having them close by was convenient and nice. But, typical American family, go over there for Thanksgiving and, big dinners and Christmas and tree and, the whole gamut. So.
Right. Yeah. So during all that time, were there any, if you think back on it now, were there any kind of early signs that you
Not that
dismissed?
early. No, there's nothing. She was a professional, working career, and no, there's nothing. She had no symptoms whatsoever.
Wow, that's amazing that it progressed so quickly. So did you have siblings that worked with you and helped with you?
Yes. So I got one sister, older sister, and she's still up in Ohio, and she hasn't lived too far from them either, all out in the country. Mm-hmm. And so being here in Texas, obviously I couldn't be much of a caregiver after she started exhibiting the symptoms. So honestly, my sister was probably doing most of it. I was doing things that I could do remotely. I was hoping, say, the financial and the power of attorney stuff and things I could do remotely from a that kind of standpoint, right? So I got the power of attorney set up and helped them take care of the will. I went up there and I think it was like Christmas after when she first started showing some of the signs. Mm-hmm. And she's still, she was showing signs, but still
early enough,
able to self-care, right?
Right.
Went to bank and did power of attorney for medical and financial, and just kind of got all that stuff out of the way.
Good.
So
a lot of caregivers wait on that.
Yeah, that's plays into your plan.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So when you started to do all that stuff, did you consider yourself a caregiver at that point, or was this kind of like you're just helping mom and dad?
No, I didn't think of, that is a caregiver. No, because it didn't help her directly, right? It was more of, the writing wasn't quite on the wall yet. We weren't really sure if it was dementia or whatever. There was no official diagnosis, but there was definitely something out. Her employer reached out and basically said, we have to let her go. She's been there. Wow. She was there. She was with the same employer from when I was probably, in 4th, 5th grade. Right? She was there for a really long time, and it was a real small practice. So it was really family-oriented business, and they're like, she's getting to the point where she answers the phone, she asks who it is, she sets the phone down, and she immediately forgets who it is. So she wasn't able to basically do a lot of her, job, and they just had to let her go. So fortunately, she was able to go on after she was diagnosed, get the full-time, full Social Security disability benefits. Otherwise, they'd have been in trouble. But so
it's amazing because that's part of the difficult part of this is not being able to recognize what those signs are, not even knowing what the signs would be. And then when these little things kind of start to come up and those little blips here and there, it's kind of like, oh, mom's just having an off day, or mom's just tired.
So I'll have to admit, there was times when me and my sister were probably, you mentioned earlier in the intro about the acceptance that maybe me and my sister had a little hard time accepting it, and we weren't quite convinced it was dementia.
Right.
We thought maybe it was stress and anxiety. She had, I wouldn't say a rough life, but there's definitely anxiety and stress within her life that we thought maybe was contributing to this, not necessarily only dementia or dementia at all. And, so we really didn't accept it.
I didn't either in the beginning. And the weird thing is when you get stressed, and you might have experienced it yourself, whenever you're in that mode of stress, I started forgetting certain things, and I started having to write down notes, calendars, phone reminders, all that stuff. And I kept thinking, oh, it's just aging. I'm just getting older. But I thought, wait a minute, because when I'm not stressed, I'm fine. And it's not difficult to remember things.
Yeah, and then we also would think, like, you know, if we ever gave her a glass of wine and stuff like that.
Right.
That would actually, it seemed to relax her, and then she was able to speak. So I should back up. The dementia affects everybody differently.
Of course.
And to a large degree, it really, in a very evil way, I think, affected my mom. So most people, like, I've had other friends and family that have gone through this as well, right?
Right.
It's pretty common. And, you know, you hear stories of, like, I might walk in with my mom and she might think I'm her brother or something along those lines.
Yes.
Right? I would have done anything to have that. Unfortunately, the way it affected her is her speech and communication was the first thing to go. So she was diagnosed, she had it for 8-ish years before she passed.
Interesting.
And she lost her speech and ability to communicate within, like, the first 2 years. So she could not talk. So it was really, really challenging to be a caregiver because you didn't know what she needed. She couldn't communicate. Right. Even yes and no, she wouldn't be able to do.
You know, what I find so interesting about that is what you described sounds like what frontal temporal dementia is. And make it clear, I'm not trying to diagnose it in any kind of way. But after going through this and digging through, trying to figure out what form she had, because again, like you said, if you don't know what's going on and where their limitations are coming from, then it's kind of hard to decide how do you help them. But I kept telling people early on, mom has FTD, and they were like, no, that's related to language and she's fine. Because my mom was a language teacher, ESL. She also taught French, Spanish, Latin. And so they were like, there's no way. But because that one part of it was missing, they dismissed all the rest of the symptoms that were present. So it's interesting because that is a possibility of it. And it's just, there's two different ones. There's the FTD that has the language, and then there's the FTD that's the behavioral variant, which is what my mom says.
Okay.
And so she's getting to that point where she can't really communicate as well as she used to. So now it's seen, but early on it was denied.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So when these symptoms were coming up and you're going through this, and you're most likely getting the updates from your sister, what was it like being here? Well, she's the boots on the ground there, and you're here. How was that like working and trying to relax at home and just knowing there's this distance?
Yeah, it was hard, that's for sure. And then what made it, I would say, I don't know how to put it, maybe more difficult was the fact that, you know, my dad would almost try and protect us, or maybe not necessarily deny what was going on, but kind of downplay it, right? So I get one story from my sister, and then it was dire straits, and then my dad would be like, oh, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, she started falling and getting injured and stuff like that, and, you know, he would do what he could to try and downplay that and stuff as well. So, I mean, I did the best we could and get back as frequently as I could, but then it's gonna sound bad, but at the same time, it was like we would go back and there would almost be no point, right? So to some degree, my kids didn't necessarily get to experience her decline, so they still had those memories of her reading books to them and stuff like that. And then we would go back and she would be a completely different person from what they remembered. And nor could she communicate with them, interact with them.
It's not the same anymore.
And it wasn't the same anymore. And it's like, I don't know. I guess I couldn't do it to some degree.
I don't blame you. And that doesn't sound bad at all, because that's exactly what caregivers experience. That's exactly, even at the stage that I'm at, after caring for mom for so many years, I'm reaching that point that it's getting harder and harder to go back to see her, because I am getting to that point where I reminisce more often. I want to keep who she was in mind, and it makes that much harder to see who she is now and where it's going. And with the kids, I'm sure it's even more difficult.
It was more the kids to me. Like, I can handle it.
What's
but
wrong
it was
with
more
grandma?
the kids.
Yeah.
It was grandma and so
So, being that you guys didn't press for any kind of specific diagnosis, how did you figure out care-wise? I mean, did you have to call in additional resources? Because I'm sure your sister had her hands full. She
Yeah.
must have had her own life as well with
Yes, she's got
spouse,
a
kids,
small army of
work.
kids that
Yeah.
she was taking care of. And
So it's just as hard.
yeah, no, she's been a saint for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so lost my train of thought.
So when your sister
Oh,
was
as
out there
far
taking-
as far as
No,
the
go ahead.
diagnostics.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Eventually she did have an MRI. Well, so they first started with, of course, the memory tests. You know, simple math, or do the clock, and
Right.
we never seen any of them. But simple tests initially, and they said she was selective mute, and that's kind of what made me and my sister at least hope that it was stress and anxiety.
Oh, right.
If it was selective mute, then she can select to not be mute.
Oh,
was kind of our thought, right?
Yeah, right. Makes sense to me.
But then eventually, as it's progressed, and this was early in the progression, right? This wasn't over a long period of time. She was diagnosed within a year, year and a half. But it was the MRI, right? It was the MRI that basically said, yeah, she has dementia. And
Yes.
she wasn't necessarily diagnosed with Alzheimer's specifically. I'm not a doctor. I don't really know all the differences.
Yeah.
But dementia is dementia, as far
It
as I'm
is,
concerned.
and I'm glad you said it that way, because a lot of approaches doctors make, or they want to be able to call it Alzheimer's, and it's difficult because, like you said, it affects people so differently, and depending on what they're doing, movement, language,
Right.
memory, all of their cognitive abilities, it's hard to say what it is until they do that kind of testing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until Mom had her testing that we finally got definitives, where I part of me wanted to be like, see, I told you so.
Yeah.
But what did I really win out of that? We confirmed Mom did have something that we really didn't want her to have. But so as the final weeks started to approach for your
Right.
mom, what was that like? Was she, knowing that she couldn't communicate to you at one point, but during those final months and weeks for her, was she able to at least recognize you anymore?
No, not at all. Unfortunately, she didn't even recognize my dad, for that matter. What made it, so what started to tip the scales, and to me, I try to hold on to the fact, like, she was slowly dying for 8 years, and the end of the journey is the end of the suffering.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I try to hold on to. But she, towards the end, we went in and applied for hospice, and there's some government programs there that we got. So we tried to get some in-home healthcare aid, because my dad was, the incontinence, and then she didn't want to be changed, she didn't want to be touched, she didn't want to be messed with, and then she was starting to get violent towards him, and hospice came in and would try and so there is some in-home hospice care, right? So they would come once or twice a day,
Right.
and so we started that, and then it just got pointed. She was obviously violent with the nurses that came in, and at one point she basically knocked my dad down to the ground.
Wow.
And
She
from
still
her
had her
standpoint,
strength.
yeah, for sure. And then so they took her. So the hospice came in, tried to help. They couldn't, and they told my dad, like, look, we'll take her into hospice care and get her on some medication that will help calm her down.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that. They took her into the hospice, and they actually, unfortunately, couldn't control her. So they said, we can't handle her. They sent her over to the ER.
Oh, wow.
And so my sister went over to the ER to stay with her, because obviously she can't be an advocate. She can't, say what's wrong with her or what she needs. So we have to be that
Exactly.
medical. So my sister was basically staying there at the ER the whole entire time. And she finally called me up, and she's like, I can't do this anymore myself. So I packed up a bag, jumped in my truck, and started driving to Ohio. And I got up there. They finally bounced her. So it plays into your motivation for this, is to have a plan.
Yes.
And we did not necessarily have a plan. This kind of went south much faster than we would have expected. And my dad he could be difficult to work with because he was in a bit of a denial. I think there was some pride there, and then some also, if he admitted he couldn't take care of her anymore,
Yes.
that she would be taken away from him.
Right.
So he didn't want to admit that he needed help.
Yeah.
That was a challenge for us. And so it, like I said, scales finally tipped. She's in the ER, my sister's there. And so I finally get up there, and just as I get up there, or my sister, I'm driving there, it's like 20 hours or so. She calls me and says, okay, well, they're moving her from the ER to I forget the name of the facility, but it was a mental health facility that they thought, okay, we'll send her there where they can get the drugs worked out to keep her calm and, get her relaxed so she isn't so combative. And so I pulled up in stopped at my dad's house, checked on him, went to my sister's house, pulled in my sister's house, and she comes out crying. She's like, the facility just called. She's starting to flatline. They want us to get there now.
Oh my goodness.
And ironically, I don't know why, but she was actually fine. They sat her up. And I don't know. So this facility was the wrong facility, I guess, is where I'm getting at to have a plan. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Of course.
And I wish we would have been maybe a little more an advocate and assertive to where she went. The goal was to get her into hospital because my dad could not take care of her anymore.
Yeah.
But the goal was to get her into a memory care facility with hospice care.
Right.
But they wouldn't take her in the state that she was in because she was too violent, too combative.
That's the problem with so many. So when I was originally looking for a place for Mom, one of the directors at community actually told me in advance, as I was describing Mom's symptoms, and it was, I think it was maybe a year after I got her diagnosis confirmed, and then I had started to mention, but she's starting to do this, and starting to exhibit that, and he said, well, that sounds like she might be showing signs of Lewy bodies. And I thought, okay, that's another one I need to look into because I didn't know enough about that one. But he forewarned me, you need to get her in sooner than later because if there's any form close or diagnosed with Lewy bodies, majority of the assisted livings will refuse them. They won't take them in because it's really hard to deal with once they get to that combative state.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. At first I thought that's just a sales tactic, so I hurry up and rush her in. But then the more I talked to other areas and found out that that is the case because of that combative nature. I didn't want Mom on medication because to me, I don't want her to spend her remaining years just sedated. I mean, it's painful to see her now, but it would be even more, I think, that there's little life left at that point.
Right.
And it's just keeping her vital organs going, but keeping her sedated. But at the same time, I don't want her finally getting good staff and good people and good care, and she's knocking people out and she's spitting in their face, and it's difficult when it comes to that.
No, it was very difficult. So anyway, she went to that mental health facility. They were going to try and work out the drugs. They were not, I mean, God bless them, they did the best they could, but they were not equipped to deal with her. So I actually stayed because my sister was exhausted. I stayed that night with my mom at that facility to help them in case she, got up and whatever needed help. So I stayed the night in a mental health facility.
That was interesting about it.
And then finally we got the okay. That's where I would say the plan, right? So know who you're going to call at 4 in the morning on a Sunday for, hey, I need, hospice care or this and that kind of thing. But while I was there, my sister was scrambling, trying to make all these phone calls and, government documents signed because she was on Social Security and Medicaid and all that stuff. So finally got the okay to take her to a retirement care facility with hospice care. And they basically had to. So at the mental health facility, they basically pumped her up just every little bit, and essentially the whole point was to knock her out because anytime she came to, she was ripping out IVs. I was fighting with her. I finally got to the point where I would hold her hand this way and hold her hand this way because she would push and pull and fight. And when she figured out I was, she wasn't strong enough to overpower me, she started to pull towards her and started to try and bite my hand. And she couldn't talk, but sometimes she would. And she was taking her fingernails and trying to dig in the back of my hand saying, scratch, 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 scratch.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, no, it was tough. It was tough. But I will say the one thing that, like, my goal was, like, I can handle what she could throw at me, right? Physical, I know if she knew what she was doing, it would break her heart. But at the same time, I know she's not doing it intentionally.
Of course.
And it did not bother me at all.
Right.
And I even told her, I'm like, you throw at me everything you got. I don't care. I can handle it. You made me tough.
Yeah.
I can handle it. But I wanted to try and make it as comfortable for her as possible.
Of course.
And the one thing that helped was music. She loved the music. So when she moved into hospice care, so they gave her, because she would rip out any IVs anytime she came to. So they gave, I'm sure there's a medical term for this. I'm not going to get it right. Essentially, it's an enema where they would able to give drugs directly that way. And it's absorbed faster. Yes. And she couldn't pull it out, right? It wasn't an IV. It was, done that way. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially how they, morphine or whatever combination of stuff, hospice administered that way. And then she was almost effectively knocked out. You mentioned earlier. So yeah, she was essentially gone. But I took headphones in because eventually, as she was deteriorating, they had the oxygen thing on her, and that I don't know, it's a humidifier or something that just runs 24/7 next to her, and all the noise in there. So I brought in like noise canceling headphones, and I just play like Beatles songs and stuff when she was young, and she would actually like lip sync to it for like the first few lyrics and stuff. So yeah, and that's what my goal was, right? Like I can handle everything, but if I could just make the last days, weeks, whatever, just a little comfortable, then I'd be happy.
You just gave me some really good ideas of what to do for Mom. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know that had to have been so incredibly painful to be in that. Taking the physical blows is one thing, but that's the point of trying to give them quality of life. It starts diminishing more and more and more, and we lose that connection of what is quality of life. And we have to switch from that quality of life to the comfort care type of care.
Right, yeah.
Where they just take care of. And the first thing when my dad was going through, he had pneumonia, and he's dying in the hospital. And when we finally got to the point where we had to understand that he's terminal, he's not coming out of this, and we made the choice for comfort care, finding out that the medication that they give him at that point it's beyond sedative. It's like deliberately paralyzing, so they can't fight and pull and do. And so I know what you're referring to. It's so incredibly hard to watch and witness that and see it. And so knowing what you're heading towards, and I hate that you experienced it firsthand and had no idea where you were heading towards, but other caregivers that will hopefully hear this and understand the possibilities and what they're heading towards. Sometimes knowing helps. I mean, it's not going to make it any less heartbreaking or difficult, but it lessens that emotional blow just a little. Yeah.
It was tough because I would also second guess ourselves, and of course hospice reassured us that, like, so initially they thought, and I guess it's commonplace, where when she got a little violent that she might be in pain and she can't communicate it.
Oh, right.
So they thought, one of the things they thought was a UTI. I guess this is a common thing, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So they did test for a UTI. She did have it.
Oh,
and we thought, okay, well, maybe she's being violent because of this, and she's just been in pain. But then they doped her up with so much morphine and everything else. They're like, look, she's still being violent.
Wow.
And we would always second guess ourselves. Well, maybe if we let this stuff wear off, she'll be better. And that was not the case. And then, I'd also think to myself, I'm like, well, what is better? and go back to your comment on quality of life, I'm like, the kind of quality of life she had just a few days ago wasn't much of a quality of life, right? So in a weird, twisted way, it was somewhat of a blessing of this 8 years of slowly dying is finally coming to an end, and her battle in this world is finally over.
She's so young. So as you're going through all of this, you thankfully had a sister that was there with you, and it sounds like you guys had a good relationship, that you were able to lean on each other and kind of go through this process together.
Very thankful for that. Yes,
because I know
we are very close, even though we're 1,300 miles ish apart. We pretty much talk every day and
awesome
and all that. So yeah,
because that's
we've always been. Thankfully, there's no family conflict in that regard. So me and her were always on the same page. My dad, maybe not so much sometimes, but it would have been a lot worse if it could have been a lot worse, I guess I should say. Yeah.
Well, and now that you and your sister have gone through this type of care with your mom, does it make you realize the proactive approaches that you can make towards your dad or for your dad if you start to see something that was anywhere remotely close or similar to some of the decline that your mother started living with?
Yes. Although I think the challenge would be getting my dad to do some of those things. Yeah. So he does not live a healthy lifestyle, and I don't think I'm going to change that anytime soon.
No,
so,
there are those that are set
sometimes
in their
I just
ways.
have to live and let live and let nature take its course, and that's where we're at. So there are things that I guess me and her do, because obviously since this happened to my mom, there's a greater chance it could happen to me or my sister. Right.
That has been the concern for me. And that's another reason that drives me to learn and share what I learned, because that was my main concern. Mom was in her 40s when this all started. I'm in my 40s now. Mm-hmm. So am I just, ticking down the time where this is like a small time bomb that it's all of a sudden my mind is going to start falling apart? And I started realizing, my choices that I make today, right now, are going to affect my outcome years down. And being able to share and turn this around to give it to my children as well, at ages 18 and 25, I'm like, you guys need to be on board with this and understanding and learning, because you definitely have the time to make drastic changes in life before you're even my age.
Right. I think teenagers and stuff are well known for thinking about the future and
worrying
exactly. about what's coming.
Well, it's been a slow transition where I try and make, like, if it's a meal, you just make it where it's appetizing to them and not really make a big deal about it. Like, see, you can eat healthy, and it doesn't have to all be Cheetos and Doritos and sodas and whatnot, but just kind of every now and again introducing and then pulling something else back, and then introduce a little bit more and then pull something else back. They don't realize it, but Mom is indoctrinating them very slowly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I would never know, but for sure. But I do feel that if we would have been able to, say, intervene, maybe even earlier, just my mom lived a healthier lifestyle, she may have still gotten dementia. But hopefully maybe it would have just been later in life. Exactly.
Postponing it later. Yeah, because we can't guarantee anything, but this whole process that I've been going through, this whole journey, and I'm sure you see it now, it brings that idea of quality of life in. Like, I had to look at myself. What is my idea of quality of life? What kind of quality of life do I have, and what do I want for years to come? It just changes everything.
And then speaking to the plan, and it potentially happening to me and my sister, I want to be adamant that I have a plan for my wife and my kids for if it happens to me.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
absolutely.
Because I don't want to be that burden on them.
And unfortunately, and that's what it comes to. And with your dad, there's so many people out there that denial is an ugly thing. Right. And it keeps us from going forward and trying to be proactive. So if you want to live the way you want to live, you don't want to change your lifestyle habits, okay, fine, but let's at least do this paperwork here on this other side, and let's just get it done and file it and set it away, and then you go live your life. You go have your life, but these things are in place. A plan is set, because I personally don't want to be in a mode of emergency, because you're not thinking straight. And then it's even harder to find resources when you're in that emergency mode. And then you're at the mercy of whose recommendations are coming at you so quickly. And for me, I have to trust those recommendations.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not easy to trust where it's coming from. And if I'm in that dire need, then I'm reducing my level of choices.
Right.
So.
And then the disease can also make you not trust.
Exactly.
You know, right?
Yes.
It influences that.
Exactly.
Unfortunately. So, yeah.
It doesn't make it any easier. So, what are the things, hindsight now that you've gone through this, what are the things that you might suggest to other caregivers?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, have a plan. Don't wait to make a plan later. Just have a plan of where they're going to go, talk to that facility, see that facility, know who you're going to call at 3 a.m. on a Sunday when, you know, it hits the fan, you can no longer take it. So don't be, I guess, ideally don't get in that position in the first place. Right. But, yeah, that would be it. And then, you know, for me, again, I'll go back to the what lays my heart easy and I put my head down at night and still smile was just trying to give a little bit of comfort to her. Like, as I mentioned earlier, I could take whatever she threw at me, but if I could get her to smile, like I would, you know, put the headphones on and the music was just so powerful to
Absolutely.
see her, you know, couldn't recognize anybody, fighting anybody she saw, and all of this, and then to turn around and start singing lyrics to us, the Beatles.
Yes, that's
just, you know, I was just so happy to see that. I'm like, yes, I got a little bit through to just, you know.
And that's I'm so glad you brought that back up, because music is so incredibly powerful. And that's one of the things that in the book I wrote that just came out, I talk about going back to our senses when this happens. And one of the things that helped me, even when you have a migraine, putting the music on and just it's like the vibrations of that music helps in certain ways. And it's amazing because even the Australian research is coming back towards ultrasonic sound to help blast cells that are being affected by dementia.
Okay.
And so it's wonderful that you came to that and that gave her that little bit of peace.
Yeah.
Towards the end, peace and happiness. In all of that chaos, she still found peace. And you were still able to experience peace towards the end. Because that's one of the things that was so incredibly hard walking away from the hospital when my dad passed. It's grasping for that peace of reconciling what just happened.
Right.
But then in that moment, you got a little bit of heaven on earth, I guess, to see her smile and be calm without medication.
Yeah.
Well, this is exactly why I wanted other caregivers to be able to hear your experience, because denial and lack of planning and just being in that moment, that emergency moment that you're in, makes it so much more difficult. And when we talk about caregivers who are stressed, that's exactly one of the places that emotional stress comes from. I'm sure you weren't calm driving from Texas to Ohio trying to get there as quickly as possible.
I set a record, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And I set a record for the way home too, because so she went into the hospice care and she was in there. The hospice said she basically set a record. She went, I think, probably 4 weeks without food or water.
That's incredible.
So I stayed up there as long as thankfully, I'm very thankful I have an employer that was very understanding, and you know, because of COVID, I have an internet connection, I could be anywhere, so I was able to basically continue to work, and then on lunch break I'd go over to the facility and see her and stuff like that. And then you know, that was kind of like school was starting, and my daughter was starting, she's a freshman and she's starting band, and I'm missing out on all these things too, and I was so torn. And then at one point I just broke down and told Mom, like, look, I'm sorry, but I gotta go. And that's probably the record I set, was driving home. I think I did that 1,300 miles in like 17 or 17 hours.
Scary.
And got home because, again, being torn, missing family at home. And then I think another week went by. And that's when hospice was like, okay, they could tell she's nearing the end and whatnot. So I booked a flight for the next day, and as we were driving to the airport, she passed. So, yeah.
That's difficult. It's extremely difficult.
The 8 years was difficult.
Yeah.
To be honest, it really was.
Yeah.
It was the 8 years. 8-ish. Yeah.
And ironically, you say that again with FTD, they suggest that from the time a person is actually diagnosed, it's anywhere from 2 to 8 years before.
Okay.
So she ran through the whole process, and I guess that's the time period. Some react differently, some progress faster than others, but that's about the time period that the brain starts to deteriorate and how long it takes for the rest of the body to start shutting down.
Yeah. Right.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time to share this information because, like you said in the beginning, if it helps at least one caregiver, and I know there's more than one caregiver out there right now that's experiencing what you've gone through, and this is probably giving them a lot to think about, whether they're in the middle of their 8 years or they're at the end.
Yeah.
And you definitely gave me a suggestion because right away when you mentioned the music, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Ideas for presence at this point, because mom is a mental, in mind, she's that 6 to 8 year old. And sometimes she'll tell me, you dress me like an old woman. And I think, okay,
that's fantastic.
I realize, okay, I'm buying things that I knew you liked
Mom's
before.
too hip for you.
Yes. So I got to buy the unicorn house slippers or something that's for age group.
Fantastic. See, that's fun. I wish I would have had that.
And that's where I'm at now.
Yeah.
So thankfully I have it, and I'm
in
seeing
a messed
the
up
bright
evil
side.
way. That's fun,
in a weird
right?
way. Yeah, it's like I'm buying kid clothes for my mom now that are large enough to fit her size, but funky enough and hip enough that she's like, cool.
Yeah, you have to let me know how to go play some music from when she was little.
And that's what she loves Motown. And so now I'm thinking I need to get the tablet or something that, maybe not so much the headset that she'll put on, but something that can play in her room, because I know for her, she'll probably take it off, put it somewhere, or these aren't mine, or,
Yeah.
But the music to bring her at least a little bit of peace of mind and happiness, because when you can break that moment of aggression and there is that moment of peace, it's kind of like you almost force them to forget, oh yeah, I'm not angry at them anymore. I'm enjoying this moment. Oh, I love this.
Yeah.
So thank you for mentioning that, because I'm going to actually do that very soon.
Definitely let me know how it goes.
Yes, definitely.
See if she gets up, starts dancing.
Oh, and put some pillows on the floor around her just in case the dancing gets out of control. But definitely, thank you for sharing your time in this story, because I know it's heartbreaking, but it's a lesson learned. It's a painful lesson learned, but hopefully someone else can get it in advance.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining in with me and Brian today. I hope this gave you a little bit more food for thought towards your journey. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, be proactive. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Khris Paradise.